Hi, everyone. I am going to be talking to you today about care ethics in gender-swapped androcentric genres in 2010's film, which I swear is a much more simple concept than that sounds. This is Chairman Meow. He will be co-hosting with me and hopefully leaving right now. Thank you. Okay. So in early in the pandemic, the Quibi, a now defunct online streaming service, had a movie called The Home Movie Princess Bride. And in it starred several celebrity couples, often in gender-swapped roles, that were lightly playing with the idea of this a very traditional, handsome, hero man and damsel in distress princess who needed saving. And oftentimes, like in this picture, the couple, sort of played up the idea of it being inherently ridiculous in through their choices of the way of their acting and their costumes. That you would have this beautiful man in a dress, this beautiful woman in the sort of uh, conquering hero look. And so this talk is going to be talking more broadly about what's going on with a certain set of films that would in genres that traditionally would be considered male centric, but this film cycle involves women and in central roles and what that means. So women in American film, it's never great, let's be honest, but like things are, better than they have been previously, I guess, in some measures. um I won't go into all the statistics, but you did see several prominent films that were specifically calling out the culture of sexism in several different ways in different industries. For example, you have these sort of direct indictments of women in a man's world. Bombshell is about at the very least sexism and more so sexual assault in the workplace at Fox News. Fighting with My Family is a more lighthearted comedy, but it's also about a woman who is talented in wrestling and no one believes in her because they want the son who is less talented to be involved in wrestling instead. And In a World is about a voice actress and how she isn't taken as seriously because voice actors are in Hollywood traditionally male. You also see this you see a lot of things in things like the war genre, for example, where this part of the problem of the film, even if the overall plot is something, the B plot is specifically about the problem of a woman being in a male dominated profession. But what I'm interested in isn't necessarily in these more direct indictments of sexism, but in the film cycle that arguably started with Bridesmaids in 2011. Now I'm using two different screens here, just posters of it, so you can see both. That they're specifically drawing on they're specifically pointing out that the film is coming from the people who made Superbad, Knocked Up, in the 40-year-old version. So in other words, they're saying that this is a film coming from the tradition of gross out humor. It's going to be bawdy. It's going to be a lot of things. And I also want to point out all of this is an actual poster for the film. These are the pull quotes that they chose. That chick flicks don't have to suck. It sets the bar for R-rated comedy this year, and the combination of those two lines saying, not just women comedies, but also all comedies. These are smart, funny women. I love how that's the quote in of itself. Like that's some sort of surprise or notable thing. And then also Bridesmaid reaches levels of hilarity and heart that movies like these, what does that mean, haven't reached in over a decade. So as most people who were around in the States at the time know, Bridesmaids was a huge hit. It started this whole cycle of of women being able to break into these more traditionally traditionally male genres. Now, do a little bit of genre theory. I don't. It's 10 a.m., so I'll be quick. The genre, essentially, genre theorist Thomas Schatz says that there are two big genres, big categories of genre, and I'm actually going to start myself a timer because I can feel myself starting to go forever. Okay, so genres of order are about law and order in society, whereas genres of integration are about community and also people coming together, i.e. social integration. Now you have the on one hand you have things like the gangster film, the detective film, and a western, and in genres of integration are things like a musical, a screwball comedy, and a family melodrama. Now you can probably already see where I'm going with this. Genres of order, if we look at the larger characteristics, are quote unquote often male dominated, meaning usually it's a male protagonist and or a predominantly male cast, and often a male dominated space overall. It involves, violent external conflict. You have to, and utopia as promise, as in like they start out in this less than perfect world, and the goal, unlike with the genres of integration, is to achieve that utopia by the end of the movie. Often through, again, through violence, through isolated self-reliance, through this sort of macho-ness in general. And genres of integration is essentially the opposite of that you have a collective heroes often who rely on one another. It's about their integration as a unit. And the world that they start out in is already pretty okay. And it's a question of sort of like being able to maintain or regain the integration that was presented at the beginning of the movie. So I want to sort of walk you through a bunch of, I had a lot of fun pulling posters of films that fit into this larger film cycle. Now, I think I used the word film cycle earlier when talking about Bridesmaids, but what we mean by that when we say that in film studies is essentially, we're not saying it's its own genre, but we're saying there's this hot moment for a few years where everybody wants to make films in this oeuvre, broadly speaking. You can think about the moment when everybody wanted to make a Twilight knockoff. Everything was about vampires and or werewolves for a few years. And so same thing with this, all the studios realize that there's a lot of money to be made in movies about, for example, putting women in sort of like hangover type comedies, the hangover type comedies. So women behaving badly, you have your young women behaving badly. You have direct reboots of action movies. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with Ghostbusters and Ocean's 8 just because they're the most largely talked about, but they're the most prominent examples of this phenomena overall. And you have more direct reboots. The Beguiled, for those of you who are familiar with it, was a 70s like action movie starring Clint Eastwood, where essentially he's a wounded soldier in the Civil War, and he gets taken in by these Southern dames who essentially attack him with their womanhood. It's a lot. Anyway, these get rebooted in ways that are making them not only more just women-centric in general, but also less oppressively sexist. And then you just have, again, like forays into genres that are typically male-centric. The Heat, Men in Black International, which is, as we all know, there's been 80 million Men in Black movies at this point. This is the first time we've had a woman in one of the two starring roles. Crime and heist movies, The Hustle, Hustlers, Molly's Game, Ocean's 8 as well. Gangster movies, Sicario, Widows, The Kitchen, and spy movies. And as you can tell from all of these posters that we've been looking through, the comedies, the comedies are sort of pointing out that yes, this is a movie of the genre, as you can see with The Spy Who Dumped Me, but at the same time, it's sort of playing with the fact of their femininity and perhaps poking a little bit of fun at it. It's the same idea with the dramas, and that you can see, these are very spy movie-esque drama posters, but at the same time, it's emphasizing their femininity and their attractiveness. So these are not by any means revolutionary movies, but certainly a different type of film cycle. And you know, we could keep on going. There are a million examples. You have your sci-fi, your revenge, your western. You know, we could even talk about the superhero movies in hypothetical, and you could argue that something like Wonder Woman or Captain Marvel are to a certain extent also part of this this overall category. Now, what's interesting to me is that this isn't just something that's coming out of the big studios when they realize there's money to make. This is actually happening through all levels of American production culture, all the way down to A Girl Walks Home at Night. If you haven't seen this movie, absolutely recommend it. Made by a Iranian American woman. They crowdsourced like $60,000, got a bunch more investments, and it's a beautiful film about a woman vampire. And to a certain extent, that is a genre, not a new thing if we're thinking about the sort of like lesbian vampire trope. But the way this movie does it is sort of reorienting it to her perspective in a way that's very much placing it within this overall film cycle of reimagining these male genres within a female perspective. Now, these movies are, for the most part, very insistent about pointing out, you know, where that they're coming from, these male backgrounds, or that how they fit within this. So again, this is specifically from the guy, not just like the producer. This is from the people. This is from the guy specifically that brought you Bridesmaids. So it's both saying this is a movie like Bridesmaids, and it's also like taking a step further than that and saying this is from the like gross out body guy-ish humor that brought you Bridesmaids behind that. And you have her in a bridesmaid dress as well on the poster. Peppermint, if you haven't seen, I'm not recommending you see this movie, but if you haven't heard of this movie, it's essentially Jennifer Garner doing Taken. And it literally says on the poster, this is from the director of Taken. So if you can't tell that it's Jennifer Garner in holding a gun, you know, and in a movie with a title like Peppermint, which I believe is something like it's like the nickname that she has for her daughter, who's the one who's taken or who was killed or whatever, blah, blah, blah. So again, aggressively trying to contextualize themselves with similar films that were previously male-centric. Hustlers was widely compared both to The Wolf of Wall Street and to The Big Short, and one of the posters has them literally walking on a $100 bill. It says "Walk all over Wall Street." So I'm not just saying that these films are unique because they're women, they're centered on women, or that the fact that they're women inherently changes the film. I'm saying that these films make a point, for the most part, of saying, you know, this is a woman who is in a position that is unusual, in that the position that she's occupying, whether it's professional or situational, is typically one occupied by men. Oftentimes, she's been put in that position by men, and she faces some kind of oppression or pushback from men through the movie because of that unusualness. And the film also makes an effort to point to how she is dealing with that situation or profession differently. And again, the films tend to frame this as because of what it perceives as like her inherent traits associated with gender. This is not revolutionary films by any means. But again, sort of the way that the films are framing it is accentuating what it sees as the gender-based difference. Again, most of these movies are still very white. They're still very straight. They're still very cis, with a few examples here and there. Girls' Night, Booksmart, Hustlers, etc. I actually can't think of anyone in the ones that I've said so far that have anyone who's within the trans spectrum, but you know, so generally speaking, very much not revolutionary. Now, the idea of care ethics fits with this in an interesting way because, in addition to the fact of these movies, pointing out what it sees as gender difference, um, in these traditionally male genres and these quote unquote genres of order, there isn't much need to excuse the man for what he sees as doing what's necessary in order to achieve the the quote unquote utopia at the end of the movie. Like, nobody has to apologize for Liam Neeson like going off and doing what needs to get done to get his family back. But it's very different when it's Peppermint. The way that these movies go to great lengths to sort of excuse these women for their transgression because of the fact that they're doing it for other people to a much greater extent than when these films are centered around men. Um, and it's I'm not saying well, same thing here. I'm not sure if I had a different point because I still didn't figure out my notes, but I'm not this isn't always bad. With something like The Beguiled, where the film that it's remaking was very sexist in the first place, the way that the perspective, this care ethics-esque perspective, adds new and valuable perspective. This movie, this iteration of the movie has the women sort of band together despite the differences around that have come up because of the man who's come into their midst. And at the end of the movie, they sort of band together for their collective benefit in order to get rid of him. But most of the time, it's a softening of the effect of this movie, of this movie, or this genre, I should say, rather than a strengthening of it. And you can see this with how Hustlers ultimately plays out. Now, both in The Wolf of Wall Street and in Hustlers, the protagonists get taken down more or less. But Wolf of Wall Street essentially ends with the suggestion that even though they faced some kind of criminal proceedings, the people who did this basically got away with it, or they came back in a way which was equivalent with what they were doing in the first place. The Big Short is much more explicit about saying these people got away with it. They didn't, they pulled off this essentially heist on the American public, and nothing bad went wrong. Now, Hustlers makes a much more explicit point of the fact that they were only doing these things for their families for the most part, because they had to provide for other people as women, as the primary caretakers of their households. And even when one of the two women, J-Lo's character, gets carried away with it, at the end of the movie, they sort of bring it back by suggesting that these two characters, need to reconcile because they're ultimately of deep importance to one another. And that's the takeaway that we're supposed to be getting from this, is that Constance Wu's character was only doing this because she has issues related to family, and J-Lo's character should be redeemed because of the fact that she she has such like true care for Constance Wu. Now, this site, I have a lot more to do with this project, as you can tell. I'm still very much figuring out what I think the overall effect of this film cycle is on the industry, and where it's going to go from here. I will note, though, that Promising Young Woman, which is out now, is a very interesting take on, or a further development of this movie. This is a revenge picture, like Peppermint, but in this movie, she, on the one hand, should I spoil it? No, I want you to see it. This movie on the one hand goes further than other films in this film cycle have been able to do so far. It is not apologetic in the way that a lot of the previous films over the past decade have been, about their protagonists. On the other hand, it also doesn't allow for the protagonist to be fully victorious, partially but not fully. And so that's all I got, I guess. Thanks, everybody.